Good afternoon again to each of you, and welcome to our latest installment of Homeroom with Education Leaders. Today's session is called Where Policy Meets Practice, Moving States Toward Implementation. My name is Jalil Hart, and I have the good fortune of serving as the K-12 director here at the Hunt Institute. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with us and our work, the Institute was founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, and we serve as a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to supporting and advising education leaders and policymakers nationwide on education issues across the education continuum from prenatal through higher education. Before we dive into our discussion today, just a quick note on a couple of logistics. We'll begin today with a moderated panel discussion, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. And during that section, you are welcome to use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be sure to pass those questions along to our panelists. We are recording today's conversation, and we'll post the video on our YouTube channel in the coming days for those of you who would like to revisit or share it with your colleagues. You can also join in the conversation on social media using the hashtag #EdHomeroom. So with that, I'm honored to be joined today by our five distinguished experts. We have our moderator, Elizabeth Basford, who's the Vice President of Literacy Content Implementation at Curriculum Associates. And our panelists, we have Dr. Lisa Coons, the former Superintendent of Public Instruction in Virginia, Dr. Paolo Pilanetta, the professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, Dr. Jennifer West, who's a Regional Literacy Coordinator for the Mississippi Department of Education, and Dr. Hiawatha Smith, who's the Director of the Graduate Elementary Education and Reading Program at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. So with that, thank you again for all of you joining us today. And Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hart. It is a thrill to be a part of this panel today. A couple of opening remarks from a 43-year veteran of American reading. Our work in reading never stands still, and so it is vital that we continue this, and I'm grateful to the Hunt Institute, who has been driving this kind of conversation for decades. Nothing we do and nothing we dream of doing can be done without people talking to people, and it has been at the center of their work and certainly our work as national leaders in moving the needle for our children. Today, using that founding principle of our hosts, I dedicate this to bringing us like minds and divergent thinkers both to the table as we see on the horizon the sun coming up for the first time in many decades due to the recent policy and work of many of the people on this panel. Today's conversation with leading experts will explore how states and district and education prep programs and local districts and every teacher who's stopping for their grande latte latte on a common American morning with the drive that their work bridge the gap between theory and practice, our central tension. And with that, I ask our first question of Dr. Coons. Good to be with you, Dr. Coons. How are you today?
I'm great. Nice to see you. I also want to echo your thanks to the Hunt Institute for bringing these conversations to the forefront. I think it's critically important.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And where are you calling in from today?
Richmond.
Excellent. Good to have you. So, Superintendent Coons, you have experience leading work in both Tennessee and Virginia. What policy shifts or initiatives are most impactful in your experience, having seen it up close and personal, improving literacy outcomes for all students, including our English language learners?
I think there's several key components to strong policy, and there are many states working on policy across the country. And I just want to be thankful and cognizant that everyone is working towards that. I think policy needs to be comprehensive. In Tennessee, we had a couple of initiatives that started around literacy, but we really saw change management when that policy was comprehensive and it thought about all stakeholders and that it included resources and support along with that policy. So when we say policy is comprehensive, we need to think about training for teachers, not just our existing teachers, but our aspiring educators. And often we think of training as some kind of package that you do online, but that's not really transformative training. So, as we're thinking about policy, one of the key levers in Tennessee that I think has leaned in over time is in person cohort based training, where teachers who work together had the opportunity to dialogue about the science they were learning and apply it to their own context and practice. After we think about teacher training, we have to think about what they're using when they come back to the classroom. And I think it's critically important for policy to take a stake in the sand and a signal of a comprehensive list of what is high quality. In Virginia, we talked about not only, science of learning to read, but also intervention resources and all kinds of pieces that were vetted from a state level and then allowed districts to make selections inside those resources. Then, as we think about what teachers are using, how are they being supported? Elizabeth, you talked about getting their latte every morning. That's a rhythm and a routine that teachers have, but they need a rhythm and a routine of support to help them transform their classrooms. And that's critically important. A lot of times in today's world, we think training done, but having coaching or third party support really for that teacher and that school leader is important to think about in that policy and in the resources that support that policy. And then this policy is about students. So we really need to think about our students. What screeners are we using for our students? Do we put a stake in the sand in policy about that screener, about the publication of screener data? Are we using screeners that are new? And do screeners update over time as we learn more about what are high quality screeners? And are we thinking about screeners that are sensitive to different contexts of students? So you spoke about multilingual learners. Are we including and requiring districts to use screeners that are sensitive to multilingual learners or students with diverse needs? And thinking through those pieces in a framework basis from policy, and then allowing a district to work inside their own context is important. And ultimately, that policy has to come with some accountability. How are districts being required to talk about their plans and publish their plans? How are we reporting student screener data, the improvement of student screener data? How are we tracking teachers being trained and supported? All of that needs to be transparent because we know if we're accountable to the public, we will actually see real change, as we've seen in the states that have chosen to do that. I do want to end with policy is just a spark. Implementation is also critically important, and thinking about that combination of investment for implementation that isn't 1 or 2 years, because we know real change takes time. And if literacy is a fundamental right, then we need to resource that policy well over time. So that implementation and the resourcing of supports is critically important as we think about policies that truly make the lever. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coons. And I will say, I'm hearing a lot more around implementation in the recent conversations I'm having nationally. So the work that you're doing is really sticky right now. It's sort of the new thing on the runway, and I'm very glad we got there because the stuff will never get us home, but the implementation will. Dr. Pilanita, good to have you today. And where are you calling in from?
From Charlotte, North Carolina.
Charlotte, North Carolina. Great to have you. Here we go. Many states nationwide, and I see many of them, have turned to letters professional learning for teachers. Project Reads North Carolina, understanding the impact of this training on teacher and administrator knowledge, has effective literacy instruction around how letters practices are implemented across North Carolina in schools. So based on your findings from that work that you helped drive around that district, could you please talk to us around educational leaders and how the states and districts use these insights to shape future literacy initiatives or investments in improving outcomes?
I would love to. And
Thank
this
you.
actually just echoes what you were saying, Dr. Coons. Project Reads looked at three aspects of letters implementation. First, we looked at teachers' perceptions of the PD itself. Then we explored teachers' perceptions about implementing the science of reading practices that they learned during letters. And finally, we examined teachers' knowledge of the literacy practices and how they implemented those practices during small group reading instruction once they had completed the training. So, in terms of teachers' perceptions of letters, teachers across the state had a broad range of experiences. Some teachers were compensated monetarily or with time off, and some teachers were not compensated at all. Some teachers were able to collaborate extensively during letters training with their peers, and some were not. So these differences in support influence whether teachers felt supported during the training, overwhelmed, or ignored. On a positive note, teachers generally found the content of letters to be valuable. Participants across teaching roles identified learning about several topics ranging from how the brain works when you're learning to read, to phonics, to comprehension. At the same time, though, participants also cited several issues with the PD itself and with the format, including applicability to varied teaching roles, limited differentiation based on teachers' background experience, redundancy of asynchronous and synchronous content, and then limited time to engage with the content. When thinking about teachers' perceptions of implementing the practices, we had three main findings. First, teachers' access to school-based instructional support from administrators and instructional coaches varied, right? Again, some teachers received a lot of support, some teachers received very little. So teachers reported that classroom visits from school administrators with a focus on literacy instruction aligned with the science of reading occurred infrequently. Instead, support administrators were often providing was giving teachers time to plan. That was the main thing. When participants received support in the form of instructional coaching, they viewed that support positively. And many teachers felt that higher levels of support from coaches would be valuable to help them implement these reading practices. Our second finding indicated that there were a variety of contextual factors that impacted implementation's letters practices, including curriculum alignment to the science of reading and to the content that they had just learned, access to materials and resources, and having sufficient planning time. And finally, after letters PD, teachers reported shifts in their instructional practice. And teachers felt that those shifts had a positive impact on student literacy outcomes. So good things there. When thinking about teachers' knowledge of literacy practices and the implementation of those practices during small group instruction, we had some really interesting findings. While teachers performed well on the letters post-unit assessments, lower scores on our own Project Reads Knowledge survey suggest challenges in knowledge retention, particularly in the areas of vocabulary and writing. Differences in knowledge also emerge when considering reading license status, with those having a reading license having higher knowledge in all areas addressed in letters, but significantly more so in the areas of phonics, comprehension, and writing. When we analyzed small group instruction, we found consistent use of explicit instruction, which is a key instructional principle in the science of reading. We also observed implementation of foundational reading strategies related to phonemic awareness and phonics. However, we found limited application of comprehension and vocabulary practices during small group instruction. On a positive note, 73% of the lessons we analyzed were rated as high quality lessons, which of course means that there were some that were rated as low quality. And unfortunately, more than half of the lessons given a low quality rating were for students reading below grade level. These are the students, however, that need the most high quality instruction. Additionally, we also observed the continued presence of some problematic instructional practices, such as encouraging students to guess the word based on the meaning of the text being read. So what can states and districts, what can you do with this information, right? How can this information shape literacy initiatives and investments? Well, we know that letters seem to positively impact teachers' knowledge, and that the literacy lessons observed included science of reading practices. However, teachers' knowledge of science of reading based on the Lexia post-test scores is likely overestimated. And problematic literacy practices continue to persist in instruction. Students who are in most need of high quality instruction aren't always receiving it. Letters was the first step in transforming teacher practice and improving student outcomes. But just like Dr. Kuhn said earlier, to continue to make growth in reading, teachers need targeted, ongoing support in the form of coaching, for example, to ensure effective implementation of evidence-based literacy instruction. Our goal now should be to transition from the science of reading into the science of teaching reading.
Thank you so much. Or we can call it the science of reading into the art, right? Of
Yes.
teaching.
The art of teaching.
And thank you for recognizing and validating that steady wins and that we constantly have to be paying attention and thinking about winning and talking about winning. Dr. West, we learned a great deal from the efforts of the great state of Mississippi, which of course was a 10-year endeavor, working really hard on the science of reading and the implementation thereof. So from your point of view, Mississippi was one of the earliest adopters of evidence-based practices back in 2013, as I said. What strategies were used to support the implementation, though, of those evidence-based practices that you think were really the powerful givers, and what were the least effective things that happened during that time?
Like we've already discussed, the key was a comprehensive approach to improving literacy. Several key areas were targeted through our policy, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. A big component for success was our statewide training for teachers. We did start out with letters, and we've now moved to AIM Pathways. And we currently offer levels of training through AIM Pathways for teachers and administrators on the science of reading, structured literacy, writing, English language learners, dyslexia, adolescent literacy, and there's so many that we're offering now. But it doesn't end there. We also host regional, district, and school level trainings on literacy and then also on coaching. This helped us to, in the very beginning, build capacity in teachers and leaders, and really to build on the best practices that we needed to see in the classrooms. It also brought understanding to the why, like the why we need to do what we do and why we need to have best practices in our classroom. The other thing that was very beneficial was an assessment suite which we used to identify the reading deficiencies among our students. We were able to identify them early and to use this assessment suite to monitor student performance and progress. We use universal screeners, of course. We do this 3 times a year, and we have 6 approved screeners that our local school districts can select, and they administer that. This helps to identify those deficiencies early so that we can jump on that and start our interventions. The kindergarten readiness assessment is part of that suite, and it helps us to identify deficiencies way before they get to 3rd grade. This helps us push that prevention over retention through this early identification. And then we can prescribe those individual reading plans that were added to the LBPA in 2016. This allows us to prescribe those interventions early so that the deficiencies are decreased before 3rd grade. Also, we have our 3rd grade summative assessment. Students have 3 opportunities to take the assessment for promotion, and then some are also promoted for good cause exemptions. So the assessment suite was a big component for that. We also deploy literacy coaches into our lower performing schools. The schools are identified based on the 3rd grade data on the summative assessment. Support is provided through our Mississippi coaching model, and within the schools, the coaches complete the coaching cycle with teachers. We pre-conference, complete an action such as modeling, co-teaching, building content, the side-by-side coaching, the support that's needed, and then we post-conference, and then we give time for implementation for those strategies to transfer to instruction. We also provide professional development within the schools, and then follow up with the teachers to support the implementation of best practices. So there's job embedded PD that goes along with the coaching. Another key component was our support for families. We notify parents immediately after every screening so that they are aware when there's a deficiency. We prescribe read at home plans for our students. A lot of the strategies that we promote are on our Strong Readers website. They're very practical, user-friendly activities that can support literacy. We also host family nights for parent support. We tell the parents what's on the assessment, what to expect in the assessment, and then also how to analyze the data that comes home with their children. Another huge component is the adoption of high quality instructional materials. Our state vetted instructional materials that we deemed high quality according to the latest rubric. And then we also provide high quality professional learning for the implementation of this, because we know that professional learning has to go beyond opening the cellophane, and this is what's included. We have to show them how to implement the curriculum, what the lesson looks like, and then guide them along that process. We also have extended our support to school-based coaches through our Literacy Coach Academy in Mississippi. We have acronyms for everything. We call it LCAM. The LCAM is our learning pathway and it's offered just for school-based coaches who are hired by their local school districts. And we train them in the fundamentals of literacy coaching. This training does mimic the training that our MDE literacy coaches receive when hired by MDE. The purpose of this program is to prepare school and district-based literacy coaches to support teachers, paraprofessionals, and even administrators in the implementation of best practices that are grounded in the science of reading. Another extension is our MEPL, another acronym. It's our Mississippi Educator Prep Program Literacy Network. This is our collaboration with educator prep programs to ensure that our new teachers are entering the classrooms aware of the science of reading and what structured literacy looks like. We partner with our ed prep programs across the state so that we can collaborate and problem solve so that we really can have teachers who are prepared to teach the science when they come into the room, or structural literacy when they come into their classrooms. Another extension is our MISL. It's the Mississippi Literacy Leadership Network. It's a network that's exclusive for leaders on the district and school level, with the purpose of providing them a platform to collaborate with people in similar roles so that we can really implement school literacy action plans that are effective in moving the needle for literacy and proficiency in literacy, and also how to effectively implement our high quality instructional materials. I don't know of a strategy that we used that wasn't beneficial to the big picture. We were building the plane as we were flying it after the LBPA was passed. The timing of every decision made along the way paved the way to where we are now. It is truly a marathon and we are still running the race.
Thank you so much. It was the first and lasting inspiration that still resonates today. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Smith, thank you for joining the panel today. It's great to have you. I have a question around the work you're doing today in teacher prep. So for teacher preparation and training, we all know that it's key to evidence-based literacy practices. What are some of the challenges you're seeing in implementing effective training for educators in preparation and practicum settings, and how should leaders navigate those challenges?
Thank you. So first, I would just acknowledge that teacher preparation and training are essential to implementing evidence-based literacy practices, as all of my previous colleagues on the panel have shared. However, one of the biggest challenges is ensuring that what educators learn in our coursework is fully applied in the practicum settings, and applied also aligns with the idea of them practicing and exploring it. As our previous panelists noted, it's essential for in-service, but it's also important for educator preparation programs. My students at the graduate level are often practicing teachers who are improving their practice, as well as I also have new teachers that I work with who are completing their initial licensure programs. Within our programs, all of our practices are aligned with legislation, either being introduced or reinforced, but building strong cohesion between theory and practice is really difficult because of school constraints. So one challenge that I like to note is limited school university openness. And with that, it's important because strong practicum experiences depend heavily upon district and school leaders who actively welcome partnerships. So without this, teachers and pre-service educators often work in silos. When our partnerships thrive, the impact is very powerful. For example, in one of the partner schools that I work with, the school has 12 classroom teachers. It's a K-5 school. We currently have 11 of the teachers serving as mentors to some of our students. This provides a rich hands-on experience for our candidates and supports the school with individualized instructions as well as targeted interventions. And as a bonus to that, many of our cooperating teachers adopt many of the strategies that we bring into the classroom because our students are learning them from us, and therefore it benefits their own learners. However, In some schools, it's a challenge because schools have a fixed program or a model that often limits what we can do that's outside of their framework. A second barrier is limited access to resources and data at the university level. So I know two of my colleagues talked about assessments and assessment data. And so that is one thing that we work heavily on at the university level, is trying to provide our students with experience with authentic assessments, such as administering, assess, and analyzing those screeners. However, without access to student data, their preparation is often incomplete. However, also many teacher educators like myself are resourceful. We collaborate with schools to obtain anonymous data for use in coursework. This allows pre-service teachers to practice the data, analysis, and identify appropriate interventions. But inequities in resource availability remains. And so that's a challenge for us because, like most schools and school districts, we also are financially strapped and we just can't purchase the resources because we're not purchasing for a school district where it's more economic to get it for a whole district if we're just using it for several people. So to navigate these challenges, it requires relationship building. And with that, it's rarely the work of one person. And so teacher educators like myself must invest time, often on top of our already full schedules, to cultivate those partnerships, to celebrate successes with schools, and to provide meaningful support that bridges the gap between university coursework and classroom practice. For example, the previous 2 years, our program has worked collaboratively with a small district for some teacher training. And this training worked well because they were going through, they were not doing letters, but one of the other training programs, and it worked complementary to it as professional development to help them to build their knowledge, skills, and dispositions where they could think about, like, how does this look? How can I make this look in my classroom while also acquiring the knowledge at the graduate level? And that's it.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the partnerships you need on the horizon in your future because it's so essential. It is so essential that we have strong practicums for our teachers. Okay, well, we have made a full run around the block, as we say in New York City. So what we're going to do now is have a little fun with a lightning round before we open it up to the audience. So this question will be for each of the panelists, and we'll circle to all of you. And here we go. As we think about the need to improve reading outcomes for students, what are some key actions you believe states should take to bridge the gap between what we know from literacy research and what should be happening in the classrooms today? So between the research and the practice, what do you see as a bridge to that gap? Again, the central tension of our lives. And I will go to, let's see, we will start with Dr. West.
Bridging the gap is going to take educator training, and not just educator training, it's going to take coaching alongside of that so that we can show teachers and administrators what we need to happen in the building, but then go alongside them and walk them through the process and provide that coaching support to make sure that the practice is making it to the classroom.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dr. Smith.
So thank you. I think for me, I envision this as exploring and partnering with this implementation because there's plenty of literacy research out there, plenty of scholarship about like best practices in literacy. However, we have this idea of, and it's been mentioned before, but big P versus little p policy. And so big P being what's written by legislatures. However, little p is what it looks like when it's implemented. And so there's this gap here between what the policy is stating and what the implementation looks like. And so the question that should be asked is who's doing the bridge work? And I think this is where states can really do partnerships, not necessarily just with universities, but with many of the organizations that can help. So organizations such as the Hunt Institute, who has graciously hosted this, as well as another that I've worked with, the Dudley Flood Center. They're excellent examples of collaborative spaces that create these connections where teachers, they've learned the best practices, they've learned what they should be doing, but it gives them a space where they can talk to someone else about it. They can discuss how it may look in their setting because like we mentioned, Mississippi is, great things going on there, but contextually, like what's happening at that school may not be the same at school B. And we have to look and see, well, what elements of school A can we take to use in school B to make it work here? Because we can't just take the whole model and shift it just because it works somewhere else. So I think that's something that we really should focus on to help to bridge our professional development and to bridge that big P versus little p legislation.
Thank you so much. It's like customizing implementation is what you're saying. Dr. Pilonieta.
I think two things come to mind, right? One is how are we supporting teachers in schools, right? And so along with coaching, we need to think about structural changes that schools can make, right? So thinking about the schedule so that teachers have time to plan collaboratively, to look at students' data and make instructional decisions based on the data that will support and help students grow, right? We need access to materials that are aligned with the science of reading. And then big picture, right? So thinking about what Dr. Smith was just saying, big P, right? We often see states investing a lot of money, time, and effort into the upfront cost of professional development. But then we also see them maybe neglecting the follow through, which is the support that we need for implementation. So I think that that's a big part, right? We've invested in North Carolina in letters training. We're not done. We need to continue to invest in supporting teachers implement those practices.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Dr. Kuhn, you started us off, and now we're going to end this round with you.
Well, I love Dr. Smith's comment about big P and little p. I think that's incredibly important as we move to what implementation actually looks like. And the state agency is typically the key lever for that implementation. And a lot of times state agencies can take a compliance look, but I think each of the panelists have talked about, and Dr. West talked about this in Mississippi, especially that shoulder to shoulder approach, that support approach. And I really like Dr. Pianetta, your statement about long term, not short term. That shoulder to shoulder approach takes time. And it's really about the how we do the work. At the state level, there are so many districts with so many different needs. The state is that policy framework, but those individual needs and supports need to look different, and those long-term supports look different. You can implement letters, you can implement another variety of training, you can do those support features at the state level, but the rubber meets the road when you go back to that district, and that district has to figure out what does it look like. And even in our districts, what does it look like in maybe my rural setting or my urban setting or my suburban setting, and how do we support the needs of learners? I think one of the critical pieces is to make that data transparent and know where our bright spots are. We as a nation are looking towards Mississippi because it's a bright spot. We have to do that in states as well. We have to really make that data transparent, that early screening data, that third grade data, the teacher prep data, the teacher implementation data, so we can learn from what is working. And then at the state level, one of our key actions is to be able to highlight those bold best practices, those practices that have the data behind it, and how do you scale and spread that in a way that you can take the context of all those different districts, all those different schools, all of those different student needs. And then you have a question in the question and answer, which is one of the most important parts that we often forget at the state level is our families. Literacy doesn't happen starting in kindergarten. If it does, we're really far behind. How do we support our families? How do we lean into that opportunity for early family support? How do we lead into that family support so that they understand what's happening in school? How do we communicate? How do we bring our families with us? How do our families feel like partners? We did a lot of work in Tennessee and partnering with the Governor's Early Literacy Foundation. And in Virginia, we partnered with the E3 organization to really think about our families and how our families work with us. So I think that is a critical component of this, because we can't think that literacy just happens in the four walls of a classroom.
Thank you so much and especially bringing families in, because there was a question in the Q&A that went there. So I'm going to find some juicy bits here in the Q&A in just a minute, but I think what I'd like to do is, instead of assigning them, if a question speaks to you, please just jump right in. We'll dive right in. We'll take a couple of answers perhaps from different panelists. And the other thing I'd like to think about is please don't be shy about asking. I'm inviting the panelists to actually ask each other follow-up questions or get a little conversation going for the rest of our time together here. We'll dial down the formality a little bit for these last few rounds. Here's a good one. Let's see, where did it go? How are you combining your expectations and training in the science of reading strategies with social emotional health for teachers, which is a key factor in effective implementation? I'm going to read that again because it's a good one. How are you combining your expectations and training in the science of reading strategies with social emotional health for teachers, which is a key factor in effective implementation?
I can chime in. Not from personal experience necessarily, right? But just from, if you look at teachers who are trying to implement these practices, it's a heavy lift, especially if they don't have the planning time, the curriculum materials, colleagues to work with, that support them to help them, to cheer them on or say, hey, try this. It might be easier if you do that. Or, you're doing great. Look at your scores, look at your data, how it's growing. And so I think it is a big ask for teachers. But when we provide additional ongoing support, I think it makes it a more manageable task, right? And less of a burden that is going to negatively impact teachers' SEL, right? And so I think some schools might be doing that successfully and other schools less so, because I don't know that we have a big policy around that yet. How do we support teachers in doing this work?
I think a lot of the research about teacher material creation says that teachers spend 12 to 14 hours cultivating and creating materials. And in our elementary, that's 12 to 14 hours for literacy, for math, for science. So if we think about all of the work and all the pressure on teachers to try and create, I think the opportunity to have high quality materials, to have the training and to have the support, and as Dr. Pianetta said, the time and the collaboration to do that, you're creating efficacy for teachers. And we actually took in Tennessee Knowledge Matters school tour in interviewed our teachers, and they said, like, knowing that what I'm doing is based in evidence, knowing that I have the resources, knowing that I have my colleagues with me, has changed my approach and my own opinion of how I'm doing in my classroom. And I think when teachers see that and then they see the outcomes, it becomes much more rewarding in their career and in their field. So I think it's about giving them the toolkit that they have deserved for a long time to be successful in literacy.
With any statewide professional development that we've rolled out in Mississippi, we've developed professional learning community shells that our coaches guide them through the process of any big training. So we make that big, huge PD, we break that down into manageable chunks, and that seems to help teachers not see it as a mountain, and we're just seeing it as small pebbles. And then we're able to have conversations around that, and then we're able to celebrate when we see the application in their classroom. So celebrating those small wins adds up to big mental health things for teachers, because they want to see success and they want to feel success. So if we go through these PDs together and then we're celebrating the success we see in the classroom, it's just big. It's just another way to guide the process with them and to be in the trenches with them while they're going through the PD.
Thank you so much. I have a direct question from, did I interrupt someone speaking? Okay.
I was going to jump in real quick.
Oh, go right ahead, please. Jump in.
So one thing that I would like to throw out is because the question asked about social SEL, and I think that falls under leaders too. As a former literacy coach before I made my transition to academia, one of the things that I experienced as a teacher, my first principal, she created a supportive environment where it was tough. I was in a tough school, but we felt appreciated. Every day that we were there, we were appreciated. I mean, things as simple as she had a cart and she would come out with snacks. Like, hey, here's a snack for today. Every time we had a professional development, we had something to eat. That's so minor, but it's something that makes a teacher feel valued and creates that space where because in one of the other questions somebody mentioned about teacher retention, and that's something I see is, sometimes, not even sometimes, the lens is on educators right now, and that's something that educational leaders can take away from by creating that space where, hey, I know my principal has my back, I know my literacy coach has my back, I know, like Dr. West, you mentioned the coaches, but I know that I can trust my coach, that I can be vulnerable with them, that hey, this is something I'm struggling with, and it's not going to be oh, we got you, because a literacy coach should not be evaluative. That should be on a principal. And so that's one way that I think it can be addressed that reinforces this idea of teachers taking care of themselves and having autonomy.
Thank you so much. I have a nice piece of feedback for the panel. Whenever there's a movement in the zeitgeist in the chat, we know that we're stirring up the pot in a really good way. So there's lots of questions about not just families, and a thank you to Dr. Coons for bringing it up, bringing it to the table, but early childhood providers and the role they might play. So here's one from a visitor, Rena Gatz. Early care and education providers. How can Head Start, pre-K, private care, how can they all be a part of state and local policy and practice to set the foundations for literacy? Have your states done anything systematically to include pre-K and early education providers in training and implementation?
I think a lot of times when a state considers training or when a state's discussing policy costs and trying to put that into legislation, they count the number of teachers and teacher seats. And so that limits the resources and the rollout of implementation of training. And that has happened in both of my roles where we had university professors who wanted to come and we didn't have enough seats or we didn't have enough space to allow that. And I think it's incredibly important and a really important thought partnership, as you know, Dr. Smith talked about all these relationships, all these partnerships you can build, that as you're thinking on the onset of policy, how do you think about the cost of training and the budget of training, and how can it be flexible enough to allow for higher education professors, for early childhood providers, for our supports, and to think about structures and ways to make sure that that training is available at that point. I also think one of the things that worked well in Tennessee is we partnered higher ed partners with schools. And so one of the interesting spaces that E3 has provided in Virginia is they actually have a pre-K curriculum that they are supporting and spreading. So I think it's about those relationships and partnerships that Dr. Smith mentioned, but it's also about that policy and resourcing that policy intentionally on the front end to have flexibility for your partners to be part of those investments that you're making in the onset of training and the shift to that science of teaching reading and that science of reading, because a lot of us have outdated knowledge, and to make sure that knowledge is current, we have to think beyond just our teacher core when we're budgeting that space.
Thank you, Dr. Coons. Anyone else on pre-K and early childhood?
We actually have early learning collaboratives where we include the collaboratives in our kindergarten readiness assessment. So they actually take the assessment that our kindergartners take as well, and they're able to have that data to know that they're ready for kindergarten. And we also provide funding for these collaboratives. We have school districts that apply for this money, and they get the money to support their early learning centers. And then we have early childhood coaches as well. So there's support going into our buildings with these collaboratives.
Thank you. Final thoughts? Okay, we're going to jump into a new question. This is a little meaty. It comes to us from Brandon Culbertson. Thank you for your question, Brandon. If you were to create a diagnostic or rubric of implementation, which areas, family engagement, professional development, curriculum relevance, resources, consistently show the strongest impact on early literacy, I guess early acquisition of reading skills, and how you measure those gains longitudinally? So have you looked at those compartments, let's say? Are they impacting the learning? And has anyone done longitudinal studies around the work they're doing around family engagement, impact of resources?
I guess I'll start it out. I have not done longitudinal work here because longitudinal studies takes a lot of work. And like as a researcher, it takes a lot of work. And most of the schools that I work in have a transient population. And so it's hard to do that longitudinal piece because the students are in and out. However, I think one of the areas that I think should be in the implementation rubric, if there was one to be created, is one that you don't have here, and that's differentiation. And I say differentiation because we've talked about families, but what about our learners? Because Dr. West, you mentioned it, like the kindergarten readiness. How are they ready for kindergarten? So when, as a former kindergarten teacher as well, when my students came in, they were all these different levels. And so, yes, I may have been teaching what is quote unquote the science of reading, but as Dr. Peliodieta, I hope I didn't butcher it too bad, said, we have to transition from the science of reading to the science of teaching reading. And that means we have to think about differentiation because everybody in that room doesn't need the same thing, including our English language learners or multilingual learners, because we often use English language learners, but we have some students who are multilingual learner. And because of that, they're in all these different spaces at one time. So that's one that I think should be included on the rubric for implementation, as well as I'll co-sign on professional development because we've talked about that a lot, that it's just really important, the ongoing PD, where people are going in to support the teachers, helping them to see what they're doing that's great, not just what you're not doing, but what you're doing is great and what we can do differently.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. More?
I would add, similar to what you were saying, Dr. Smith, I am not familiar with any research study that compares each of these components and determines which one is the most important. But like that, I think that's why education is so complicated. It is not going to be one single thing that is going to make the biggest difference. It's all of those components that are necessary, right? And when all of those components are working in cohesion and alignment, you have success, right? But that's what makes it challenging. It's any of these components are not being valued or supported, then you're gonna have a gap, right? You're gonna have a missed opportunity for learning.
I don't know if it's a research study, but Tennessee, starting with Race to the Top, did training. Then they did coaching. And then they did some quasi material work. And they saw little bits of jumps and then it stopped. Little bits of jumps and then it stopped. So until they had a comprehensive approach, there was no true impact in the work. And I do think ultimately we all want to look at data of student gains. And Dr. Smith talked very eloquently about every student and every student group. And the only comprehensive way we can compare states by student groups and by overall work right now is NAEP data. So I do think we see several education entities going back and looking at the NAEP data for Mississippi, for Louisiana, and looking at which levers were working. So I think there is an opportunity for more to come, but just based on past experiences and being part of action research in Tennessee, we saw that until you had that comprehensive all parts, it wasn't going to really move the needle over time.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and hope that all of your questions will eventually get answered, even if it's offline and after this. We have about probably 6 minutes before I should stop and let our friends from the Hunt group close us out. But there are a couple that I think we can attack pretty quickly. Given Dr. Smith's comments, I would appreciate more about how teachers are trained to teach reading and to do so in a culturally and racially competent and knowledgeable way. So if anybody just wants to add a little something to our last round around how we teach reading and how do we do that in a culturally and racially competent and knowledgeable way.
I guess I'll start. So the biggest thing for me is embedding our teachers in settings where they're exposed to people who are not like them. And that means going against the grain here. Even myself as a Black male, often people think, oh, he is the knowledgeable one in diverse groups and culturally responsive. I am very knowledgeable, but I don't know every group. And so by starting to provide students with experiences where, or teachers, where they see different groups of students, then they start to understand, hey, everybody's not the same. And there's plenty of research out there. Dr. Gay's research on culturally responsive practices that's really great about like some of the nuanced things that we can do. But honestly, the biggest things is just being welcoming and actually listening to students and trying to some way infuse their culture within what's going on in the classroom, and not in a superficial way, in a meaningful way where they see themselves represented and they see that, hey, this learning is important to me, and they see themselves.
Thank you.
This I can talk to about from personal experience because I currently teach future teacher educators, right? And I teach several literacy classes. And one of the areas that I focus on is how do we support multilingual learners or students who speak African American dialects or something that's different than what we consider the standard American English. And what we talk about, at least in my class, is thinking about the sounds that are different, let's say in Spanish that from English, right? And how we focus on those sounds, right? Or how we spell those sounds that might be different. And so looking at that and building on what students know about their language and really being transparent about what that looks like in this language, in English, right? And so I support students in making those connections. And so that's one small, very practical strategy, right? That applies to teachers who are working with students who speak different languages.
Thank you. Any last comments on this?
We talk about mirrors and windows, meaning that we want children to be able to see themselves in the books that they read in the classrooms. Those are represented in their classroom libraries. It's available everywhere, but also the windows where like Dr. Smith said, that you can see beyond what you're used to and what's familiar to you. So making sure that we're having that mindset when we're looking at curriculums and also the things that are in the classroom.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. All right, we're going to try something fun for our final rounds. Everybody ready? Shake your hands, get a little, okay, sort of like a speed date round we're going to do. Everyone will answer this question, and it comes to us, excuse me, from Colleen Danielson, and it's a nice meaty question. So we're going to close out with this one. So you can put the cherry on top of your cake right here. Okay. In many systems, we talk a lot about fidelity of implementation, but not always about integrity of implementation. Ensuring practices are applied thoughtfully and in context How can state policies or supports help move the field beyond compliance toward decisions grounded in integrity and responsiveness to local needs? I'll give it one more time, kind of quick. In many systems, we talk about fidelity of implementation, not always about integrity of implementation, ensuring practices are applied thoughtfully and in context. How can state policies or supports help move the field beyond compliance toward decisions grounded in integrity and responsiveness for local needs? Somebody kick us off, and then we're just going to go nice and fast around the block.
Well, we are currently pushing high quality instruction materials in Mississippi, and we say that you have to begin with fidelity. Before you can really branch out to integrity, you have to develop and deliver the lessons as designed. So meaning that we want you to complete the lesson as it is in the teacher manual. And then once the teachers become, and they internalize the lessons and they really know the learning objectives that are expected within the lessons, then we branch out to integrity. It takes 3 years to fully implement a curriculum. And within levels of that, you see the continuum of fidelity to integrity. So I feel like that's the shift that we're making. We really want you to do it as designed, and then you can use that teacher input, teacher classroom experiences to move towards integrity.
I think at the state level, when you think about policy, the policy has to be a framework that is based in evidence, but has that ability to be customized. So if you put 3 curriculum on your curriculum list, you probably aren't going to get the customization that you need. If you think about this is the exact schedule or this is the exact training, you're not allowing that context and implementation to happen at that district level for the district to think about what are the actual needs of the students in the district. I think one of the things we did in Virginia is we created different networks that for districts that really needed support in multilingual learners, districts that really needed support in our economically disadvantaged community. So how do you create those supports then that allow districts to really think about their students? We know that our teachers are student experts. So giving that balance for teachers to be able to implement well and implement the science well, but also have the ongoing support at the teacher, at the school, at the district level, and being thoughtful about that framework and that customizable support around that framework and the give and take between that. It is a challenge at the state level, but it's critically important as you think about long-term, and I'm just going to say this one more time because I don't have any more chances, long-term implementation, because it is not a sprint. It is a long marathon to make sure our kiddos are supported and have the opportunity to read well.
I think when you're thinking about integrity versus fidelity, I think that's when we capitalize on our teacher knowledge, right? And so we support integrity by building teacher knowledge so that they know how to make the decisions that are going to best suit their needs, right? Or their particular context, right? Like this curriculum was designed for this population, but I've got this population in my classroom. So how do I make these informed decisions that are going to support my student learning versus just going with what's in the book?
And to finish it out, I would say seeing what others have done or what they're doing. And I think that comes from both being open to sharing what implementation is being done, as well as reading what others are doing. And I can say this as the next editor of English Leadership Quarterly, I'm looking forward to supporting work such as this, where it speaks directly to this idea about what are people doing. So what are they doing in Virginia? What have they done in Mississippi? What are they doing in North Carolina that's working? And schools actually sharing what they've done. So then other people see, well, this is how they tweaked it to make it work there. Or this is what they did to make it work.
Thank you all. Look at us. We are such good kids. It is 2:59. And Jaleel is back to close us out. Thanks, Dr. Hart.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and our panelists, for such an engaging conversation. It was really wonderful to hear all of the different perspectives and best practices of things that we're seeing across the country. And we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, your experience, and your expertise with all of our attendees today. So thank you again for joining. Before we close, I do want to share our upcoming K-12 webinar that is coming up in November, and it will focus on quantum and STEM education. So we're really excited about that conversation. So we encourage you to share that information with your colleagues so that they can join as well. Thank you again for joining us today. We do encourage you to continue to check our website for the webinars that are coming, and do tune into our YouTube channel to see our past conversations, and this one will be uploaded soon. So with that, have a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining.